Hi folks, we are looking at the graphs of the two trig functions sine and cosine. Okay, and they look like this. Whenever you graph a trig function, your graphing calculator, you got to make sure your calculator is in radian mode so that your window will allow the graph to show up. But they're circular functions and they move in a cyclical pattern. And there are parts to these functions, namely the period, the amplitude, and the vertical shift, which is called the midline in delta math. A period in a graph of a function, a circular function, meaning sine or cosine, means one cycle through until you're starting over again. Okay, so the black there would represent one period. All right, so the general sine and cosine equation is written like this, and the coefficient in front of the trig function, the coefficient in front of the x, a number that's added on, and then the coefficient, or not coefficient, and the constant at the end all represent different parts of the function. Okay, the amplitude means you take the absolute value of a because it's referring to a distance, and it represents half the distance between the maximum and the minimum. So if I go back up here and show you the amplitude, the full distance between the max and a min you can see is this much. So half of it would be just this much. So that would be the amplitude for that function. The period is the length of one cycle. And I already talked about that, but the way to get it is to take 2 pi divided by the coefficient of x. The phase shift or horizontal shift is what you get when you set what's in parentheses equal to 0. So that's really the shift left or right. And we're not going to do really any problems in that. I just want you to know that that's what that was. And then the vertical shift is the constant added on at the end. It's also in delta math called the midline. And it would be y equals c, would be where does the graph cut through horizontally. So when you're looking at a problem like this one, you can see there's no number added on at the end, so it'd be just plus 0. But if it's asking for just the period, then you take the coefficient of x and take 2 pi divided by that. So then I would multiply by the reciprocal. 2 pi's are going to cancel out, so my period would be 7. Let's do another one. Just looking at the coefficient of x, which is 3 pi. So I take 2 pi divided by 3 pi, and I get 2/3. These problems are not difficult. And in delta math, they're going to ask you just for the period or just for the amplitude or just for the midline. But when you're looking at the amplitude, they're actually going to show you a graph, okay, rather than an equation. So when you're looking at a graph, you want to look at a high peak and a low peak and the distance vertically between them. So if I go all the way down to where that low is, can you see that the distance is 4, which means that the amplitude is going to be 2 because you take half of that total distance. Okay, so if I had a cosine function, that 2 is going to go in front of whatever the trig function is. So in front of cosine or in front of sine is where you see the amplitude. And I would just want to show you how the solution is written in delta math. So they show you the high and the low, and then that distance is half of it. All right, so then they're going to ask you for midline. Midline is also like, how is it shifted vertically? And what horizontal line cuts the whole graph in half? And so you can see that if I were to draw a horizontal line through this function, my midline would be -2. It means that if I had an equation A cosine of bx, this number out here would be a -2, so the constant would be a -2. All right, so you're going to go to Delta Math and do the problems there. Reach out if you have questions. This puzzle is 6 of one, half a dozen of another, which basically means kind of they're the same. Have a good one, folks.